Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha TV watching Big Picture with me, Rajat Kane. Now today we're discussing how last week's Pulwama attack where 40 CRPF personnel were killed is drawing strong response from India. In a stern message to Pakistan, New Delhi has decided to stop the flow of its share of water to Pakistan from rivers under the Indus Water Treaty. The announcement was made on Thursday by Union Minister Nitin Gadkari after the attack generated series of strong reactions across the country. Now, similar demands, or to say sentiments to stop the flow of India's share of Indus water to Pakistan were echoed after the Uri terror attack in 2016. Now, the Indus Water Treaty is a water sharing mechanism between the two countries that came into being in the year 1960. The system comprises of mainly the Indus River and 5 other rivers that flowed in undivided India: Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas and Sutlej. The basin is mainly shared by India and Pakistan with a small share from China and Afghanistan as well. Under the Indus Water Treaty signed between India and Pakistan in 1960, all the waters of 3 rivers, mainly Ravi, Sutlej and Beas, also termed as eastern rivers, were allocated to India for exclusive use, while the waters of western rivers, Indus, Jhelum and Chenab, were allocated to Pakistan. Now, after announcing the stopping of water to flow its share to Pakistan, the government has also reiterated that it would like to divert the waters from eastern rivers to Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. How this decision would play and alter the contours of Indo-Pak relations given the soaring tension after Pulwama attack. To discuss more on this issue, we are joined with 2 guests in the studio, Mr. Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, and Professor Swaran Singh, Chairman, Centre for International Politics, JNU. We're joined by 2 other guests, Mr. Uttam Kumar Sinha, Senior Fellow, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, and Arvind Gupta from Vivekanand International Foundation. Thanks all of you for joining us. Mr. Shashank, I would like to start from you first. Now, what is Indus Water Treaty that was signed between the 2 countries, and what are the section-wise allocation of waters to both the countries? If you could explain to viewers to begin the discussion.
Broadly, it was felt that India and Pakistan could have long-lasting peaceful relations if only they could agree to share Indus and its tributaries' waters amicably. And it was with this intent that they went to World Bank, which was willing to finance some of the projects. And they said, all right, we should be able to work it out. Now, the Indian side, under Prime Minister Nehru's leadership, was really thinking that if they were to make more than a generous sharing arrangement to Pakistan, that should create a suitable climate in Pakistan for long-term peaceful relations with India. Unfortunately, it did not happen. That's a different matter. But as a part of this, almost 80% of the water flowing through the Indus and the other 5 rivers was to be given to Pakistan, only about 20% to India. But it was a small price, that's what Nehru thought, for peace which will permanently reign between India and Pakistan. On the other hand, Pakistan felt that India is doing all this in order to make Pakistan a subservient power totally under the control of India. So they were willing to take that 80% water and at the same time hurt India in every other way, and also say that, well, India does not like the independence of Pakistan, India does not like the existence of Pakistan. So these are the kind of issues which had been arising, because from time to time there were some friendly gestures which were also made. Pandit Nehru had perhaps conveyed through some of the old friends living then in Pakistan that perhaps one could think in longer term of some idea of a confederation between India and Pakistan. And Pakistan saw that, took the proposal and saw that, well, what all they could gain from India in this, and then say that, all right, India wants to be the most important power in the region and reduce the independence of Pakistan. So these are the kind of issues which have been always existed. India saying that, all right, as a big brother, as the main state following the British colonial rule, we should be more than generous to Pakistan, more than generous to other neighboring countries, so that we can have permanent peace in the region. Other countries, because they have their own feelings, and especially in Pakistan, where they got the feeling that they got a moth-eaten Pakistan rather than what all they wanted, because they wanted Hyderabad state also, they wanted Junagadh, they wanted a passage going through India from west to east Pakistan, which they did not get. So they said this is a moth-eaten Pakistan and this is not enough for us. We need something more. So therefore there was always an anti-status quo feeling in Pakistan, whereas India was quite willing to live with the status quo. So this is the basic issue which arises out of Indus Water Treaty. Those feelings have remained. India has been always saying that, all right, even on the eastern rivers, they did not utilize all the water that was required. They say, okay, some water can flow into Pakistan for their own needs, though it's not necessary, but they are willing to allow it to go.
Professor Singh, has India been extremely magnanimous to Pakistan concerning sharing of waters with on Indus River front?
I think you're right. In some ways, India has been enormously generous the way this whole idea of Indus Water Treaty was conceived in 1950s and finally ratified in 1960 in Karachi. First thing to understand is that before this arrangement came about, water was supposed to be seen as a sovereign resource. So India in fact used to charge Pakistan in initial years for supplying water across the borders to Pakistan. Then of course this whole new understanding that upper riparian and lower riparian states should treat it as a common resource and they should make arrangements of sharing water as seen appropriate on both sides. And that's what I think was a revolutionary step in that sense of agreeing to share it as a common source. And as Ambassador just said, bulk of it was actually given to Pakistan and India took only part of it, except that rivers that were going to Pakistan were allowed certain amount of usage by India. Other than the consumptive usage, you could use it for navigation, for irrigation, for fisheries, for all kinds of things. And one of those areas which has become over years rather complex and confrontational is the use of building these hydropower dams, which repeatedly over years Pakistan has brought about as a contentious issue and sought resolutions over a period of time. But we also need to understand a very quick point that this whole arrangement was located in 1950s. We are today in 2019, so there are so many things that have evolved since and that are not addressed within that arrangement that was created in 1950. Some of the quick ones would be the huge population boom. Today about 200 plus million people are dependent on this whole Indus water grid. And of course this whole enormous urbanization, commercialization, industrialization usage, which is changing the way this water is being used, which was not conceived earlier. And now add on to the fact that about 17% of water that Pakistan receives is coming from Kabul River. And this arrangement says nothing about Kabul River and arrangement between, let's say, Pakistan and Afghanistan. And India's increasing participation in projects in Afghanistan could trigger some response from China because they could see that India is doing something to the dislike of Pakistan. And indeed, Indus Water Treaty also originally starts in the Tibetan Plateau.
Right.
So there are, I think, two more stakeholders, Afghanistan and China, which originally were not part of this arrangement. So I'm saying enormous changes have happened in last about half a century, which Indus Water Treaty does not accommodate. And that, I think, creates enormous amount of sense of disaffection on both sides and suspicions. And I think those are areas where we need to really take it forward as we begin to sort of think of what to do with it in future.
Let's expand the debate outside. If you could speak to Mr. Arvind Gupta, Director of AIF. Sir, if you could hear me, there were calls.
Yes, I can.
Or to say the sentiments to stop the flow of water to Pakistan from the Indus River Treaty at the time of Uri as well. And now there has been a tweet by Mr. Gadkari, and even the ministry has reiterated that the water would be stopped, and the minister has reiterated what he said earlier as well. So will it be first time ever that any government would take a decision to stop water to Pakistan?
No, as was mentioned by an earlier speaker, that the eastern rivers were given to India for complete exploitation and utilization. That water was to be used by India, but some water was flowing out. India should have done that much earlier, but somehow that was not done. And not only that, because of the deterioration in the infrastructure, like the sluice gates and the canals, etc., we found that not all the water was being used and some water was going out. So what India is doing today or saying today, it may seem as a response to the attacks, and the context is really the Pulwama attack, and earlier it was Uri attack. But the fact is that we should have taken steps to utilize that water of the eastern rivers much earlier. Be that as it may, now the problem is that how do we respond to this repeated terror attacks that have happened, and that is where I think now the government is looking at various options, and water is a very important and a sensitive subject, and what Mr. Gadkari is saying is that whatever water is allowed under the Indus Water Treaty for utilization and the water coming from the eastern rivers, the government of India will now take steps, construct infrastructure and improve infrastructure to make sure that all the water is utilized here. So that is what Mr. Gadkari is saying. But of course, it's a very sensitive stage in India-Pakistan relations, and Pakistan is likely to misinterpret this as being, India's threat, etc. But there is no really threat here. It is simply reiterating our rights on the water that we already have under the Indus Water Treaty.
Right. Professor Sinha, if you could hear me. Professor Sinha, what else could have been done from Indian side to have exclusive control of the water, which now it wishes to curtail towards Pakistan? Well, I'm afraid...
Well, the Indus Waters Treaty has provisions and restrictions. It's just that we didn't follow. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please carry on, sir.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, I just said that the Indus Waters Treaty has provisions and restrictions. It's just that India never really seriously carried on the provisions of the treaty. It's not a new thing. Even in the 70s, when we were building the Salal Dam, Pakistan objected to the project. And eventually it took 26 years for the Salal Dam to be completed. Likewise with the Tulbul navigation, it remains suspended since 1987. I really don't understand why India can't restart the Tulbul navigation project. So I think this is one way of showing and demonstrating clearly that many of the projects on the Indus Waters Treaty, both on the eastern rivers and on the western rivers, need to be kick-started in earnest. And I think a lot of attention and financial investment need to be put.
Right. We'll get back to you, sir.
Hello?
Yeah. Ambassador Shashank, I mean, what perhaps could have been a reason for India not going full throttle on the projects that perhaps could have been on our exclusive waters?
Well, you remember that there was a time when India really had very little money, and there were so many other priorities which we wanted to set up. So even when we went in, for example, our 5-year plans, we wanted to identify priorities and go in only for those projects which were absolutely necessary. So therefore, our idea was that since East Punjab used to be more or less a desert state, so we wanted to spread the benefits of the canal system and have canal-based irrigation in East Punjab. And that is how the Bhakra and other dams came up. And this has continued, but then there was also this feeling that maybe at some stage, India-Pakistan relations would become normal and they can live like maybe USA, Canada or whatever other two neighboring states. I think because Canadians may not be very happy with many policies of the USA just now, but there somehow the feeling always remained in India that all right, even if we cannot spend all the money, it will at least create a goodwill gesture that Pakistan is getting some money from eastern rivers. The western rivers also, they would not be so ticklish all the time. They were pin pricking. We wanted to utilize the water for the run of the river plants. We wanted it for navigation. But Pakistan would each time, they would keep saying, no, you bring in an external expert, you bring in arbitration, go to the court of law, something, all these kind of things, just to delay, just to harass Indians and increase the cost of those projects. Whereas they were going to China and getting everything free of charge. they were going to other countries and getting money from them, saying, all right, we are willing to dispose of all our land at your, give it as equity to you. They have been doing that right from the beginning. That took Baluchistan, they were handing it over to others. POK, they took from India and now they are trying to hand it over to China. So that is the attitude which Pakistan has always had. So India has now firmly decided that this far, no further. And therefore, we would like to utilize all the Eastern River waters. We would like to use all the water that is possible under the terms of the Indus Water Treaty for the Western rivers.
Yes, Professor Sinha, I mean, Singh, I'm sorry, sir. I mean, just before you add on, I mean, is that brings me back to the first question I asked. Has India been magnanimous, and now we are actually thinking, okay, fine, there needs to be a little more deterrent and it may be water now?
I think that in essence, India has, of course, been magnanimous, and there is nothing unusual about it. And given the size and the leverages that India has, it's expected of India. But I think it's important to understand that of the eastern rivers, of the total about 33 million acre cubic, it's only 1.6 million acre cubic that is allowed to go to Pakistan so far. So that's one. It's not like enormous part of those rivers is going to Pakistan. It's a very minuscule part that is going. Second, the reaction is not after the Pulwama attack. The decision by Cabinet Committee to set up Shahpur-Kind project was taken in December. What is interesting is that both the comment in addressing a public rally and then later a tweet by Nitin Gadkari has been a very smart move in terms of psychological warfare. And the media has lapped up, taken the weight, including New York Times writing a long piece, India is going to deny water to Pakistan. Even ministers tweet very clearly says it's only about eastern rivers. And I think in that sense, it's a good play of words in which entire media is playing up that, you know, it's like India is denying water to Pakistan. And last point, this is not the first time. You remember Uri in 2016, Prime Minister himself had said, blood and water will not flow together.
Right.
So that was much stronger, and that created much bigger furor in Pakistan and fear compared to now. I think it's a good play of words, and it is creating a little restlessness in Pakistan as to what India potentially could do. And there are always, these are gestures which have an influence in taming and I think isolating and in sort of keeping Pakistan in check in supporting certain kind of activities that harm India.
Right. Mr. Gupta, I would like to come to you. I mean, will this move give India a leverage on the international front? And also, now Pakistan has said that they're least concerned by this step of India. But is it like, but has Pakistan spoken of too much too early?
Let me just address two other points before I come to your question.
Right, sir.
You were talking about magnanimity.
Yeah.
I think India was magnanimous in some other ways also. India also paid 62 million pounds at that time to construct some dams in Pakistan. So that was also part of the Indus Water Treaty.
That was in 1960.
I mean, this has never happened before.
Was it?
That we gave more water, and at the same time we also paid money for construction of dams in Pakistan. That is one part.
Okay.
The second is that I think it is necessary to understand that whatever is being done within the purview of the Indus Water Treaty as of now. In other words, India is not stopping water from flowing into Pakistan. India is only using the water which is its own, to which it has rights under the treaty. So I think otherwise, the media description of this move, etc., can go out of control and India will get a bad name. I think we must explain to our viewers that it is really under the treaty we have right over the Eastern River waters and which we are utilizing. Now coming back to the question of how the international community, etc., would react, etc. But there are very few people who fully understand, particularly in the international community, what is this Indus Water Treaty all about? Why? Because Indus Water Treaty is essentially a highly technical treaty. At that point of time, the concept of joint river basin development, etc., were not there. And as was explained by, I think, Mr. Shashank, that there was a need at that time to use these waters to develop our East Punjab and so on.
Yeah.
And as a result, it was considered a good treaty, okay, that at least we'll have Eastern River waters. Bhakra Dam, etc. was coming up at that point of time. There was also a pressure from the World Bank at that point of time that if you don't come to some kind of an understanding on the sharing of waters, the aid to India and Pakistan would stop. So there were a lot of things which were happening behind the scenes. As a result, this treaty was signed. But it is essentially a very technical treaty of which there was, and it was really negotiated by the engineers on both sides. There was hardly any political input which was coming into the treaty. And it took almost 8 or 10 years before the treaty was signed. Now, this background is often not understood. And now we have in Pakistan a lobby which is, talking about Jammu and Kashmir, which promotes terrorism, etc. And they are also, in the past also, they have issued out threats. And I think one of the SPD chairpersons at one point of time had said that if Indus Water Treaty is stopped or India interferes with the waters, that could be even a threshold for nuclear war between India and Pakistan. These kind of irresponsible statements have been coming, and there's a highly inflamed public opinion in Pakistan. So I think we must explain this to our readers and to everyone, and must try and understand what this Indus Water Treaty is all about. And certainly the international community, this narrative that India is stopping water, etc., should not be allowed to go out of control, and awareness should be created as to what Indus Water Treaty is all about, and we are really using waters which are our own.
Right. Mr. Sinha, I would like to come to you. How should India articulate its point of Indus Water Treaty so as to drive home the logic that it's not stopping any water to Pakistan, instead it's using its own water, which is our own?
Well, I think the 1.5 MAF of water that was freely flowing to Pakistan is now going to be used by India. Itself suggests that India is paying attention to the kind of water it was losing. Now, 1.5 MAF might seem small, but it is still quite substantial. It translates into 1 million acre of land having 1 foot of water. I mean, that's the kind of volume of water you're talking about. And on the eastern rivers where the water is dwindling, this is an amount of water that is flowing freely to Pakistan that must be arrested. And I think this move is quite important. In fact, this move has been started post-Uri, when a lot of attention was given to the kind of water that was flowing freely. That's one. Secondly, I think India needs to sensitize the Kashmiri people about the delays and the cost of the projects which, Pakistan deliberately tries to do. Earlier the Salal Dam and the Tulbul navigation was raised as a matter of disagreement, and it was, settled within a bilateral arrangement, the Permanent Indus Commission, right? But the Baglihar changed the entire context. It was shifted to the neutral expert, and the Kishan Ganga became a matter of the International Court of Justice. So I think there is a strategy in Pakistan to delay many of the Indian projects,
right,
raise its cost, and eventually frustrate India on this water development program. I think India needs to carry this sensitization of what Pakistan is doing, not only amongst the Kashmiri people, but also the international community, that really at a certain point of time, India is bearing a lot of cost on the Indus waters.
Right. So, you think that Pakistan would try to internationalize the issue the way they have done with every issue, as Mr. Sinha just said, that they would try to delay. They have delayed a lot of things, and they'll try and make demons out of this move by India.
I think there seems to be consensus among all four panelists that it's one of the very detailed agreement, and it's a very forward-looking arrangement that was created in 1960. So that there is no basic flaws with the arrangement structures as such. The problem lies in political equations between India and Pakistan. So even when it is an ideal arrangement, you will always have contentions between these two countries, suspicions about each other, what they are doing. And I think that is where the limitations are. And that India will have to deal, I think, at international level and also at bilateral level. But one way of resolving such issues very often in international relations is to expand the number of stakeholders who are engaging together. So bringing in, kind of a revised arrangement of Indus Water Treaty potentially, which again might take a decade when you start, could start now, where you want to bring in China, Afghanistan, into it, so that it is not limited to, sort of simply India-Pakistan confrontational relationship, and also many issues, the whole climate change issue, which is, glaciers are melting, deforestation, inundation of the whole region, floods and droughts. These are issues which will have to tackle in the future, and they create that further complication in suspicions that we have with each other. So I think this is a time when India could take initiative also to look at how it can be widened, revised, and bring in more people into it, more countries into it. Right. And that would perhaps give India a little more leverage in dealing with implementation part of the story, which I think has been lacking partly because Pakistan keeps raising questions once, every time.
Right. So last words to you. Theoretically, if we implement this move, which seems likely, how much time it will take? I mean, there are reports that it may take up to 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. It is only a declaration of intent at this stage. We have already started working on this. It's not that the government of India has said, all right, from tomorrow we are going to stop everything. So it will take time. Pakistan will of course try to take a very dramatic kind of a view that, well, all right, all water is going to be stopped, and so therefore they are asking their people to rush to the hospitals and to donate blood, etc., etc. All kinds of schemes are being planned. But we must realize that Pakistan has been misusing water, whatever it is getting. All the lands have become barren under the Indus water irrigation. I have myself been there, and I find so much of leaching of salts which have come up on top that most of the cultivation can't take place. So therefore, actually Pakistan must really take into account other modern technologies in order to properly utilize water which it is getting. But it is spending all its time in fighting with India, in bleeding India, and in making sure that India is not able to implement any of its projects for the benefit of people of Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab and Haryana, etc.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen. So we have to wrap it up here. So clearly, India perhaps needs to articulate its point more to drive home the logic that it's not any wrong move, but it's the exclusive right of its own water, and it has been magnanimous to Pakistan for quite some time, but not anymore. Thank you for watching Big Picture.